I am the Grim Reaper, taker of souls, and guide to the afterlife. I am that which is death, life's ultimate unknown. Join me on a journey into the world of the most nightmarish tales imaginable. I am your host, Reaper's Horror, and these are the Reaper's tales of the strange and paranormal. Tonight's tale is The Flames of Halloween's Past Are Still Burning Strong by Reaper's Horror.
It all just makes me want to puke.
Frank thought to himself.
This commercialized bullshit. This family-friendly horror. I'm talking about Halloween.
It was indeed Halloween, and Frank hated everything about it. He hated the pumpkins. He hated the scary costumes, but more than anything, he hated the brats that banged on doors demanding candy. Trick-or-treaters.
Trick-or-treat my ass.
He muttered as he saw the old man across the street being surrounded by a group of costumed teens.
Look at them. Way too old to be trick-or-treating. They might as well be mugging the poor bastard.
Frank thought about helping the poor man, showing those overgrown pricks what real horror was. Frank, however, had more pressing thoughts on his mind, like the need to get drunk. Whiskey was his alcohol of choice. Any brand would do. The taste didn't matter, so long as he ended up wasted in the end. He stopped at a hole-in-the-wall liquor store and bought a bottle of Old Crow Kentucky Straight Bourbon, the cheapest whiskey the shop had to offer. He barely even made it back outside the store before loosening the cap and taking a giant gulp of the bottle's contents.
Ah, yeah. Now that's what this night needed,
he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his sleeve. It would be many more miles until Frank would reach his apartment complex. So long as he had enough whiskey to get him there, and enough to drown himself when he got home, he didn't mind the walk. Eventually, as he staggered down the sidewalk, Frank passed the vacant spot where Mr. Johnson's house used to stand. It was still barren after all these years. When Frank realized where he was, he felt his stomach begin to ache. He hunched over in a cold sweat and began to puke violently. He was terrified by the mere thought of Mr. Johnson. It didn't matter how many years had passed since the night he died on Halloween. Was this feeling just a coincidence? No, Frank didn't believe in such things. Even when he was just a kid, he didn't believe in coincidences. When Frank was growing up, they didn't have Halloween. Not like today, at least. What they had was a lot more real. Frank's memories began to cloud his vision like thick, heavy smoke. It happened when he was only 13, and back then, he went by Franklin, not Frank. He was a pretty good kid back then. Sure, he was developing an interest in the occult, but it wasn't anything dangerous. Well, not yet anyway. Still, even so, danger had a way of leering its ugly head where it didn't belong, and that head belonged to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson had his eye on one of the teen girls from the high school where he taught 12th grade history. That girl happened to be Frank's girlfriend at the time. Her name was Melissa, and she was the sweetest thing on earth. One evening when classes were over, Melissa gave Frank a tight hug before boarding her bus. As Franklin waved goodbye to her, He was pulled aside by Mr. Johnson, who clearly wasn't happy that the two teens were seeing each other.
Franklin, what were you doing to Melissa?
Mr. Johnson said in a scolding manner.
Nothing. I was just saying goodbye to her.
The boy managed to answer.
Nonsense!
Mr. Johnson sneered.
I see the way you look at her, the way you put your grubby little hands all over her.
Franklin felt ashamed despite doing nothing of the sort.
It's not like that, I swear.
Franklin said as his voice cracked.
Listen, you little brat. She's too good for you. She's out of your league. And if I ever see you bothering her again, I'll personally cut your balls off myself.
Shouted Mr. Johnson as he pulled hard on Franklin's ear. He shoved the young boy to the ground hard and stormed back into the building. The next time Franklin saw Melissa, he kept on walking. He felt like a coward. Later that night, Franklin cursed Mr. Johnson. He willed that something terrible would happen to him. He visualized it. He felt it. And that night, it happened. Some say it was the faulty wiring in Mr. Johnson's house that sparked the flames. Others claim to have seen a kid put a firecracker through his letterbox, probably in hopes to give the old man a heart attack. Only Frank knew what really caused the fire that night. It was the curse. The curse he had cast upon Mr. Johnson that very same night. Franklin and Melissa didn't see each other much afterwards. Something had changed between them. More accurately, something changed about Franklin. Something had grown dark inside of him, and the relationship between the two of them ended quietly. They just sort of drifted apart. Melissa and her family eventually moved to another state, and the two never saw each other again. Frank was thrust back to the present day by a burning pain and the sounds of his own screams.
Ow!
Huge flames shot out of the back of his pockets as he began rolling on the ground in a panic. When the flames died down, he could hear the sounds of children laughing like a pack of wild hyenas. It turns out one of the kids had stuck a Roman candle in his back pocket when he was hunched over with his mind in the past. As Frank got up, he felt the burnt skin where the seat of his pants used to be. He didn't care that his rear was exposed. He could only think of one thing. No, it wasn't getting back at those punks for the trick they played. That could wait. Right now, he just wanted to get home so he could drink the night away, until it too faded into a memory. When Frank finally returned to his apartment, he did his best to tend to his singe behind. Thankfully it was nothing serious, but it sure did hurt. He'd be lucky if he didn't end up with blisters. He thought about putting on a fresh pair of pants, but went straight for another bottle of whiskey instead.
Screw it.
He said as he untightened the cap and put the bottle to his lips. The phone started to ring just as he was taking his first swig, causing him to choke.
I'm coming, damn it!
Frank angrily picked up the phone and answered the caller on the other end.
Frank here. What do you want?
Trick or treat! Smell my feet!
Came the childish chanting from a friendly voice.
Very cute, Nicole. Very cute.
Frank said dryly into the receiver.
Now leave me alone so I can get drunk in peace.
You sound drunk enough already, Frank.
Nicole said in a sweet tone.
Come on, talk to me. Tell me what's bugging you.
What's bugging me?
Frank asked her angrily.
It's Hollow fucking...
Yes. Hello, fucking ween. Your favorite time of year. A time for tricks and treats.
Nicole interrupted him.
Let me guess. You got the former?
How'd you guess?
Frank asked as he felt the swollen flaky skin on his butt with his free hand.
Just a hunch.
She answered coyly.
A hunch, huh? You don't say.
But Frank didn't believe that. He knew better because Nicole was a gypsy, and gypsies believe in a thing called fate.
So, you saw my ass in your cards.
That and much more.
She said with a flirtatious flair.
Well, I hope you like what you see.
Frank was beginning to loosen up a bit. Whether it was from the whiskey or the conversation didn't matter much. All that mattered to Frank was that he was able to get his mind off the past. Unfortunately, the past sometimes has a twisted way of catching up with us. The same can be said of the ghosts that haunt our past.
Oh, Frank, you're a card.
She laughed. That was when he smelled the smoke. He saw the fire and felt the flames. Then he heard the screams coming from Nicole. She had erupted into a human inferno, like she were a human made of matchsticks, and Frank saw it all with his mind.
Nicole?
He yelled frantically into the phone.
Nicole! Nicole, no!
He yelled into the phone until the line went dead. Frank shakingly hung up the phone and collapsed into a gibbering heap on the floor. He knew what he had done, but he didn't know how or why. Had he placed a curse on Nicole without being aware of it? Was he subconsciously angry with her for some reason? There wasn't much Frank could tell the police. Not much they would believe anyway. So he didn't bother telling them the truth of the matter. Despite this, the investigators listed him as a witness. Maybe even a person of interest. Of course, that last part would have been on an unofficial level, since the paper didn't even print his name in the article. The report of the fire was vaguely written, since there was little known about the incident. Only a few scant details could be collected at the scene. Nicole's body had almost completely disintegrated. Her ashes covered the entirety of the room. The only part of her that was left untouched was her right hand, and it was still clutching the phone. All that they could use to get a positive ID were the rings on her fingers, and the crescent moon tattooed on her wrist.
That's her, all right.
Frank said grimly, as he tried not to choke on the rancid smell of burnt flesh.
Do you know of any enemies she may have had?
The investigator asked.
No, not that I can think of.
Frank answered.
You don't think someone did this intentionally, do you, officer?
He asked, hoping not only for an answer that would put his mind at ease, but maybe make him seem a little less at fault.
We're keeping all avenues open,
The officer said instinctively.
but we'll let you know if we find out anything.
It was a typical bullshit answer Frank expected from a cop in this town.
Thanks. I'd appreciate it if you did.
Frank said as he left the scene of the incident. While the police force wasn't despised by the local citizenry, they weren't exactly held in high regard either. Whether their poor reputation was deserved or not depended on who you asked. Here in this part of town, however, you'd be lucky to find much support for the boys in blue. Frank had a similar distrust for the law. It was nothing personal. He just had a strong disdain for authority. It was a feeling he had developed from an early age, probably ever since high school. He hated anyone that held power over him. It's what drew him to the occult in the first place. In the world of the occult, knowledge was power. It didn't matter where you came from or what you wore. So long that you had possessed the knowledge necessary, there was no limit to what you could accomplish. That line of thinking was what made Frank a magnet of all sorts. It was why some people liked him, and it was why others wanted a piece of him. It was also why one girl fell in love with him so long ago.
Melissa?
Frank's voice said faintly in disbelief. He saw her walking down the other side of the street like a ghost from his past.
Melissa!
He called out to her while waving his arms frantically to get her attention. Her jaw nearly hit the floor as she recognized the now grown-up version of the boy she grew up with.
Franklin? Oh my God, it is you.
Melissa cried out excitedly as she ran across the street to greet him.
I can't believe it. It's really you.
she said with a hug as tears ran down her cheeks.
Melissa,
Frank tried to apologize for not staying in touch. He was clearly still in shock.
Shh.
She shushed him and kissed him passionately on the lips.
It's okay. Really, it is.
The two spent the whole rest of the day together. First with a cup of coffee and some major catching up to do, followed by a friendly dinner date and even more conversation. They left no secrets between each other. As the evening ended, the two rekindled spirits walked back to Frank's apartment. She held on to him like a prized trophy.
Frank, dear, that woman that died, were you and her...
Melissa turned to him and asked with worry in her eyes.
lovers?
Frank finished the sentence for her.
No, Nicole was just a really great supportive friend.
You're going to miss her, aren't you though?
She looked oddly hurt as she said this.
Yeah,
Frank said with a nod.
I am.
I'm sorry, Frank.
She said sorrowfully.
It'll be alright. I'm here now.
Forgive me, but I was wondering, maybe you'd like to stay the night?
Frank asked, trying not to sound too forward. She raised her eyebrow at him as the words escaped his lips.
I mean, that is if you aren't staying anywhere.
He quickly added.
Frank, I'd like that very much.
She said as she took his hand and let him guide the way. The two made passionate love that night. It was like a dream. Afterwards, they drifted off to sleep, still nude and wrapped in each other's arms. That night would have been perfect had Frank's sleep not been plagued by nightmares. He awoke from his slumber to the sound of tortured screams. The whole room was engulfed in flames, and so was Melissa.
How could you do this to me, Frank?
She wailed in an unearthly tone.
You'll burn in hell for what you've done. You'll burn in hell.
Her flesh fell from her bones as she was slowly reduced to ash.
Melissa!
He cried out.
Forgive me, I'm sorry.
Frank awoke from the nightmare in a sheer panic. He sat up and looked at the nude form of Melissa still laying asleep next to him. He let out a sigh of relief. It was just a terrible dream. He pulled the covers over her and hopped in the shower. The events of the night before still haunted him. It was the thought that he could still be responsible for the flames that bothered him most of all. Just like when he cursed Mr. Johnson back in high school all those years ago. How could he have willed such a fate on either of them, he wondered. Sure, Mr. Johnson was a cruel man, he reasoned, but Nicole was his friend. She didn't deserve to die, not like that. After finishing his shower, Frank emerged from the bathroom and saw Melissa examining a lighter she had removed from Frank's dresser drawer. It had a crescent moon symbol etched onto the side of it.
I didn't know you smoked.
She said, as she glanced up to see Frank standing there with a towel around his waist.
It was a gift, and I don't.
He said.
Why do you ask?
I'm just curious.
She said, as she started a flame and looked deeply into its burning light.
It just fascinates me. The fire.
You sound a bit like a pyromaniac.
Frank said jokingly.
Meh, maybe a little.
She said, as she closed the lighter. She quietly placed it back where she found it, as she tried to hide her tears.
Melissa, what's wrong?
Frank asked.
You lied to me, didn't you, Frank?
She asked in a voice that showed very little emotional depth.
No. Melissa, what are you talking about?
Frank was very confused.
The girl, Frank. About the girl.
Melissa growled with embers burning in her eyes. Frank could feel his body temperature rising. It was like his blood was boiling and his heart was going to explode into a ball of fire. His skin began to broil slightly as he coughed up smoke from his lungs. He didn't know what was happening.
You loved her, Frank, didn't you?
Melissa shrieked.
No, it's not true.
He yelled in agony.
Tell me the truth, Frank.
She angrily demanded.
We had a one-night stand.
He admitted.
But that's all it was. Now please, make it stop.
He cried out as he fell onto his hands and knees. He looked up and could see that she was now a human inferno.
No, Frank. You will burn like the rest of them.
She said as she caught fire to the rest of the room.
But I love you.
Frank said with tears evaporating from his eyes as fast as they could form. The words were true, and Melissa, despite her rage, knew this. She was no longer blinded by her anger, and could once again sense the good in Frank's soul.
I love you too, Frank.
She said, as the flames that surrounded her body began to die down. She rushed to his aid, and gently helped him to his feet. The entire apartment was now covered in flames. They had to get out of there fast. They were both still completely nude, but there was no time for modesty.
The fire escape,
said Frank as he pointed to the window. Melissa guided the badly hurt Frank in that direction, and they both slipped out through the window onto the fire escape. Quickly but carefully, down the steps and the landing they went. Eventually they safely reached solid ground.
Frank, I am so sorry for everything.
Melissa said as the sound of emergency sirens approached.
Can you ever forgive me?
Frank nodded. He was too weak to speak. Melissa threw Frank's arm over her shoulder and walked him into the open sight of the emergency personnel.
He's burned bad.
Melissa said as she handed Frank off into the care of the EMTs.
I can see that.
The paramedic said as he placed Frank into the ambulance.
We need to get this one to a burn unit. Stat! Miss, you can ride up in the passenger seat so you can get checked out of the hospital.
Can I maybe get a change of fresh clothes too?
Melissa asked as she covered her private areas with her hands.
Of course, miss.
The paramedic said as he grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her.
They'll arrange to give you some clothes when you get there.
Thank you, sir.
She said as she climbed into the passenger side door of the ambulance. She looked into the back of the vehicle where Frank was strapped to a gurney.
It's going to be okay, Frank.
She told him.
I'm here now.
But as the words left her lips, she felt a slight burning sensation build inside her. That's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and a message in the comments section below. I am 𝗰𝐴's Horror. Please join me here again next time, because our journey into the strange and paranormal has just begun. like, comment, share, and subscribe.